Auzubillahi minash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. As-salatu was-salamu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilman. So, assalamu alaikum everyone. Today's reflection is called Where Excuses Do Not Work. And today we're going to be reflecting on some more verses from Surah Qiyamah, and these are verses 14 and 15. So verse 14 says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Balil insano ala nafsihi baṣīrah. Nay, man is evidence against himself. And then verse 15 says, though he puts forth his excuses. So after Allah swears by the self-accusing soul at the beginning of the surah, he takes us one step deeper. Now we said that the nafsul lawama is the part of us that feels guilt when we fall short. But in these verses, Allah is telling us something even more profound, that we're not only capable of feeling blame, we are capable of seeing ourselves clearly. In other words, the human being is a witness against himself. The word baṣīrah comes from insight. It implies inner vision, insight, clarity, and it suggests that beneath our stories, our defenses, and our justifications, there is a part of us that bears witness, that knows. We may explain, we may rationalize, we may defend our choices, but underneath all of that, we know. And this fits in very well with the compass metaphor that we have been developing this Ramadan. Now, we know that Allah proportioned the soul and He inspired it, He calibrated it to know, right from wrong. He did not leave us morally blind. And He gives us some tools, right? One of them is the GPS, the blaming soul, the alerting system. And this is another tool, right? That we have the capacity to bear witness, that we have the deep knowing of when we have veered off course. So when Allah says, even though He offers His excuses, it is capturing the psychology of self-justification. When our behavior does not align with our values, we feel discomfort. And instead of changing the behavior, which is, not that easy, we often try to change the narrative. We say things like, everyone does it, it wasn't that bad, they made me do it, I had no choice, this is just how I am, this is generational, right? And excuses such as these are simply attempts to quiet the blaming soul. But what Allah is telling us, what the Qur'an is reminding us, that even when we offer our excuses, we remain witnesses against ourselves. The story may convince others. It may even convince us temporarily. But the deeper part of us, the fitra, the deep, the innate, the primordial nature, that is not fooled. Now, sometimes the testimony is not only internal, this can have physical ramifications, and it's probably easier to understand this from a physical example. So a smoker, may deny the harm, right? They may say things like, my grandfather smoked and lived to be 90. I do other health, everyone does it. I do other things that are healthy. It's not that bad. I've started doing less, whatever, right? They minimize the risk, but over time, their body speaks. They have blackened lungs, they have shortness of breath, they may have a persistent cough. The medical scans do not argue, they bear testimony, the body testifies, right? In the same way, our spiritual and emotional states can testify. Chronic anger, for example, carves lines into the face. We look angry. Bitterness hardens the heart. Dishonesty erodes trust and isolates us. People don't want to be around us. Even if we justify the behavior, the consequences are accumulating. The soul, like the body, keeps a record. And this is just on a very surface level from what we know. We have no idea how our DNA is changing in line with the actions we take, right? What we're doing, what we're saying. And there is some science around which is, trying to measure things which were previously unmeasurable, right? There are fMRI scans which can look in our brains and tell us when we've been kind, when we've been generous, for example. So it turns out that when we do these good things, our whole nervous system can kind of gets a reboot. I read one study once a while ago, which said that when you do acts of kindness, it's like your cardiac system gets a mini tune-up. That's how good it is for you, right? And similarly, we don't recognize, or we may not be obviously aware of the impact that it is having on our DNA. But what the Quran is trying to tell us is that there are multiple layers of evidence that are being gathered when we are, off track, right? So Allah is also, telling us that you already have baṣīrah. You do not need constant external surveillance. You don't have to wait till you are exposed, right? The inner witness, it's active now, not only on the day of judgment. So that slight discomfort in our chest, that unease after saying something hurtful, the restlessness when you've crossed your line or not given your best. But I like to think of this, or what I generally think of this, is sitting in the yucky muck, right? It is really uncomfortable to recognize these things about yourself, right? But that is the baṣīrah. That is your soul testifying in real time that you are not in alignment with who you were meant to be. And this, we have to recognize that this is a gift. Why is this a gift? Because we are still in the zone of action, right? We can apologize, we can repair, we can recalibrate, we can ask for forgiveness from God. We can quit the habit before the lungs are destroyed, for example. We can soften the heart before it hardens completely. Now, what makes accepting responsibility even harder? Sometimes we recruit others into helping us silence it. What do I mean by that? So, for example, I may have done something which I'm not feeling that good about, and my conscience is pricking me, and I confide it to a friend, what I did and what happened, right? What are they likely to say, right? No, it's not your fault. It's not that bad. Don't be so hard on yourself. How many times have we heard that when we are trying to take responsibility? Don't be so hard on yourself. And here's the thing, being hard on ourselves, it's a fine balance, right? I'm not suggesting that we engage in constant self-criticism. That is not what I'm saying, right? What I am saying is that when our conscience is alerting us to something, or where our soul is bearing witness that the excuses that we are coming up with are not quite there, that we can do better, for example, that's when we need to take it seriously. Now, one is friends, right? The other is the work culture. So work culture, for example, we live in such a litigious society that we're not encouraged to take responsibility. If we make a mistake, what will everyone try to do or try to advise us? Cover your tracks. Don't admit, because if you admit responsibility, if you admit you've done something wrong, you will be held liable rather than acknowledged. But here's the thing, when people make mistake at work, they need to be supported. The one who's really messed up is the one who needs the most support. If at work, for example, we have the culture that if people are taking responsibility, they are vilified and they are not supported and they're used as scapegoating, it's not going to encourage a culture of taking responsibility, right? The third thing that makes it very hard for us to take responsibility is AI. Whether you engage in it or on a just occasional basis, whether you ask it to look at your work or whether you look at it for therapy, which I know many people are doing today, right? The default position, the way AI is programmed, is to validate everything and, quote unquote, to be on your side, which is actually what makes it so attractive, right? If I'm feeling I've done something wrong, I guarantee you go and put it into ChatGPT, and it will tell you, it's not so bad, you're on the right track and whatever, okay? So it takes us further away from accountability and responsibility, right? So while we're in this world, there are many things that are, even though our soul is bearing witness to ourselves, there are many things that uh, help us delay or avert accountability and responsibility, right? Now, the Quran asks us to imagine the day when these excuses no longer work. There is no curated identity like we have on Instagram, for example. There is no reputation management, which is what so many people caught in the current scandal are doing, right? It's actually really deeply upsetting. Instead of taking responsibility, they are doing everything, gaslighting, the victims. And these are really good examples of how human beings try to avert responsibility, right? But on that day, there will be no self-branding, there'll be no carefully constructed narrative. We will not be able to hire PR firms to spin the narrative. Um, it will just be us and our souls that are bearing witness, our DNA, which has signs of what we have done, right? So, and the thing is, what the Quran reminds us repeatedly is that on that day, we cannot but agree with the testimony, right? It will be very clear, it will be very obvious. And, the idea is that deep down, we always knew. So let's practice something. Instead of defending ourselves internally, giving ourselves excuses, let's try something different. How about beginning to notice when we are offering excuses? Notice when we are minimizing what we already know is misaligned. And instead of, useless shame, which doesn't do any good, respond with honesty, right? We can practice saying something like, yes, that was not aligned with who I want to be. Because remember, what we have been saying is that Allah has honored Bani Adam, right? We are meant to, Iqbal has a beautiful couplet which says, "Tu shahi hai basira kar paharon ki chatanon par." You are a Shaheen, you are that magnificent bird, that eagle that is meant to rest in the highest of mountaintops, right? So don't settle for anything less. And so this is not about condemning ourselves. Islam does not teach us that we are inherently bad, right? This testimony, the witness on that the fact that we are witness on ourselves is not an attack on our worth. It is actually a call back to our original nobility. It is a call back to who we were meant to be, to the potential within, and to actualize that, right? So the inner witness is not our enemy, it is our guide. And as long as we can still hear it, as long as something inside us still protests, still stings, still nudges, inshallah, we will not be lost. We are being invited to return, my friends. See you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.